So, Lord, as we listen to your word now, and as we kind of peek in on a conversation between Jesus and this unnamed woman that focuses around worship, Lord, would you speak to us? Would you speak your truth to us? Thank you, Lord. Amen. So this is the story of the woman at the well, and I started it last week in the healing service and spoke of the living water that Jesus was talking about to her. You probably know the story. He was sitting at the well, the woman arrives, wrong time of day to be collecting water. She's all on her own. She should have been coming with the women at the beginning of the day. Clearly there's a bit of an issue going on there. And Jesus asked for a drink. Do you know, I think it's fascinating that all through the story he never gets the drink. He never actually has a drink of water. It's interesting that. And there was the conversation about living water, and she says, well, I don't know, where do you get this living water? And if you've got living water, why do you need a drink? It was that kind of conversation. And living water we looked at is, in the Jewish concept, was what comes from God's hand, what comes directly from God's hand. So it's the water that speaks, that comes from rain, comes from heaven, or comes out of the natural springs. That's living water in the Jewish idea of living water. And of course they have the Dead Sea that has no life in it, but they drink most of the year from the cisterns where the water has been kept and collected, and I guess over time gets a bit musty. So living water has this sense of freshness about it. And to the Jews, it reminded them of the presence of God. So living water speaks of something of the presence of God for us. And we know what it's like to stand under a shower and be completely refreshed and cleansed and revitalized, don't we? Hot shower in winter, cooler shower in summer, and the transformation that can bring to us. And then we thought about that emotionally and spiritually, and standing under the living water of God. Let the living water pour over my soul, and what that would do to us. So that's the story that's happened so far. And so I'm going to read the rest of the story. Actually, Esther, I've missed off 2 verses. I apologise. I'm going to read 2 more than I've actually given you. I'm going to read from John 4:15 to 26. So that we're coming in on the end of that conversation with Jesus, and the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't be thirsty again and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the Spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, am he." I don't think I've ever spoken about this story before. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've realised, I've come to realise that it's because I've never really liked it. I confess to you, I've never really liked this story. And I suspect that is because so often this woman is spoken of as is preached about as a shameful creature. She's talked about as kind of working almost as a prostitute. She's promiscuous. It's living a shameful life. And there's always been something really heavy about it, at least in my experience. Maybe that's not the same experience as you've had. So I've never really liked it. But actually I've discovered that when you dig, there is a lot to be delighting in this story. Despite the misunderstanding, she still hasn't quite got what Jesus means by living water. Jesus presses on. And when I looked at it last week, we saw the fact that at the beginning of the story, it says Jesus had to go. He had to go through Samaria. This was a divine appointment for him. He may have only had the nudge that he had to go that way. He may not have fully understood why he was going that way, but he had to go. And he sits at the well and along comes the woman. And it's just him and her having this conversation. Jesus presses on with this conversation about living water until she says, "Sir, I want some. I want this living water." And Jesus says, was this a nudge of the Spirit? Was this a word of knowledge that he was acting on? Go get your husband and come back. I wonder if he knew the problem or guessed the problem. But don't you think there's a kindness of Jesus there? Go get your husband and come back, rather than saying, I know you've had 5 husbands, and kind of pointing out her shame. He gives her the opportunity to tell him. That's kindness, isn't it? And actually, she tells him. She does tell him. She's had 5 husbands, and the man she's now with either hasn't or won't marry her. We know nothing of why that is. All we know is the stark fact. But as I've looked at the way that Jesus has dealt with her, I don't think, you can challenge me on it, but I don't think I find any condemnation in his words. I don't think I find any shock or judgment, because in fact what he seems to do is to credit her for being truthful. What you've said is true, he says to her. He's not moralizing or anything like that. He is just saying, yes, you're right. The more correct interpretation has something about the honourable about it. You have rightly, you have honourably said the truth. I think Jesus, in a way, is kind of commending her for being truthful. And he has a high regard for truth, doesn't he? And I hadn't seen that before. He finds truth in this woman, despite her shame that she is feeling. And we kind of sense that because she's there on her own. She's not come with the group of women in the way of the water-getting pattern where women travel to the well together and gossip gently along the way. She's not doing that. She's there on her own. And the woman says, I see you are a prophet. She recognizes that there's something different about Jesus. She recognizes something of God about him. And she's been confronted, really, by the state of her life. Not because he's provoked it, but because he invited it and she gave it. And now kind of her life is laid out before him. There's a commentator called Barclay, and I was reading what because a lot of commentators dwell in the kind of the critical nature of this woman's life, or criticizing her life. But Barclay says this: there are two revelations in the Christian life. The revelation of who God is, and the revelation of who I am in the presence of God, who is holy. The revelation of who God is, and then the revelation of who I am when I meet God, who is holy. And I think we see that going on right here in this discussion, in this conversation between Jesus and this woman. She has suddenly begun to have the revelation of who Jesus is. I see you are a prophet. The Samaritans thought of the Messiah as the revealer, the one who would reveal. And here is this man revealing to her something of her life. And she has this revelation of the state of her life when she's standing before him. Something rather lovely about that, isn't there? This revelation that's going on. And then she says, is she throwing a curveball here? Is she detracting from that uncomfortable moment? She says, but you Jews say that we can only worship in the temple. And our people have worshipped on this mountain for generations. But you say that Jerusalem is the only place where we can truly worship. So has she thrown a curveball there? Has she kind of thrown out an argument, an old chestnut in those days? Has she thrown out the old chestnut because she doesn't want to pursue the conversation? Or is there an underlying conversation going on here that actually is speaking of deeper things? And I wonder if there isn't something deeper going on. I wonder if in the light of that revelation that she's just had, if she's actually saying, I recognize the state of my life, and I want to go and worship God and make amends, but where can I go to do that? Because you say, the Jews say, the temple is the only place where I can really do that, and I'm not allowed to go there. So now I'm left in this limbo of not being able to deal with my life. And if that's the case, it makes absolute sense then that Jesus says what he says next. Because what Jesus says next, neatly avoiding the debate, he says, have faith, trust me, a time is coming, in fact it's here now, where geography won't matter, place, location won't matter, because true worship is going to happen in the heart. So therefore, lady, you can deal with it right here, right now, with me. Doesn't that make sense of that conversation? And she says, are you saying we don't have to go to Jerusalem? Yeah. True worship in your heart. It's going to happen in your heart. What matters is worshipping, he says, in spirit and in truth. We worship with the Spirit, with that revelation, with that nudge that the Spirit brings. And we worship in truth, acknowledging who we are and who God is. So if we are in a difficult time right now, our worship might not be full of high and excited praise. And if we try and do that, we're probably not being true to who we are. If we're grieving, our worship needs to be full of lament. That's being true. That's worshipping in truth as well as in spirit. Does that make sense? I grew up in a church. It was a good church, really good church. But when I was little, and it was rather more kind of strict than it kind of moved on to be, there was a huge fear of what was called or thought of at the time as emotionalism. That people were afraid of emotionalism. So the worship was kind of starved of emotion. You know, the excitement that the Spirit brings. It was truth. It was full of truth, but there was nothing of the Spirit to kind of light the fire. And probably you've all known experiences like that. Neither would I want to be in a church that is absolutely full of kind of spirit and emotion, but doesn't hold to the truth. You know, that sings songs where the lines are a bit wacky here and there. You know, we've probably all known that as well. Actually, we need the balance of the both, don't we? We need spirit, we need truth. And so here is Jesus with this woman. She's had 2 revelations in the space of a rather short conversation. She's known herself fully revealed. And what does she do? She runs back to the village and she becomes the evangelist to that area of Samaria, because that's the impact on her life. She's now an ambassador. And she says, come and meet this man who's told me everything I've ever done. That sounds like a woman who is no longer stuck in a place of pain and shame. That speaks of a woman who has been set free, doesn't it? What a story. I think I rather like it, actually, now that I've looked at it in a little bit more detail.